recording, just so you all know. And let's get started. So before we begin, let's start with some items of business. So just make sure you should have called in with computer to enable your sound. You need to click connect audio, but then also turn off video. That helps with the connectivity and since all of us are working from home, myself included, it will help with our internet as it goes on. Also check the volume on your computer. If you haven't opened up the chat box, please open up the chat box on your screen because that's going to be our primary source of communication today as we're going through this webinar. And to begin with, if you can for me, type in your first and last name in the chat box because this is how I will be taking attendance. Zoom does not have any way for me to really do this. So if you could just do that for me, that would be fantastic. Thank you. And then again, just as a reminder, mute your cell phones, mute your microphones, and also turn off the video. So let me introduce myself to you guys. This is a picture of me and my family on our last family vacation. It was actually a year ago. My son graduated high school and we did a family road trip up to the Four Corners area at Mesa Verde National Park and a couple of other national parks up there. But I am the K-12 Social Studies and World and Native Languages Specialist at the Department of Education. I've been there for a year now. Prior to that, I taught public school for over 20 years in grades 7 through 12. And I was fortunate to have been able to work on the committee that helped to write the standards for just about 2 years. It took us with about 100 educators from all over the state to write the standards. So that's a picture of us. My husband is also a secondary teacher. He teaches high school at Mountain Point High School in Phoenix. And then my daughter just graduated from the University of Arizona as an Arabic and Middle Eastern and North African Studies major. And she's off to Morocco in January for a fellowship through the State Department. So what I'd like for you guys to do, I see a bunch of you guys put in your attendance, so thank you very much. I'll have you do that again at the end of the hour. But I'd like to have you also now, just so I get a judge, because this is K-12, kind of give me a little bit of a pulse of who's on the line. So if you can tell me the position you teach, the grade you teach, and then kind of rate yourself as far as how you use primary sources. 1, you use them a lot. 2, you've tried to use them. Or 3, you're not really quite sure what to do with them. So take a minute and do that now, please. Great, a lot of middle school teachers, fantastic. Oh, good, some primary grade teachers, great. High school, oh, 5th moving to 4th, fun. It's always challenging switching grades, I think. Perfect, 6th and 7th grade. Social studies specialists, oh, wonderful. So some academic coaches. Wonderful. Oh, great, we've got people from all over. Fantastic. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. So hopefully if you guys kind of rate yourself as a 3, you'll have some confidence that you can try to use them a little bit more in your class and maybe move yourself up to a 2. And then if you are a 2 or you've tried to use them a little bit, hopefully this will give you more resources and new places to look that maybe you hadn't thought of to be able to use them in your classrooms. So today what we're going to be focusing on is really just examining what is OER, because you hear that acronym a lot, and then what are primary and secondary sources, determining where to find these sources, and then lastly, I really want to make sure that I leave you guys with plenty of materials that you can take and use right away in your classrooms. So we're going to try a little thing. So obviously we're all at home, myself included. I'm going to see if this video works. I live in an older part of town and the internet's availability is not the greatest. So sometimes the connectivity is not like super fast. So I'm going to try and show you this video here. If it doesn't work, I'm going to put the link in the chat box. It's only like a minute minute and a half long, and I'll have you guys just kind of watch it on your own. But I'm gonna see kind of guinea pigs if this works, because I've called my internet provider, and hopefully they've increased it and it's better. So, whoops, let me go back here. And, oh, it's not, let's see. Oh, it just keeps going there. All right, well, that's not gonna work. Okay, let me actually share something else with you. I have it here on my screen here. There we go. All right, so can everyone see this? If we can see the video here, let me pull up the chat box here. All right, let me see if this this works a little bit here.
Educational resources. These are materials that have had an open license applied to them.
So it could be a full textbook, a single unit, a worksheet, an interactive.
Just to check, can you guys hear that video okay? I'm gonna see here, I can't see the chat box now. Yes, okay, oh, wonderful. Okay, great, thank you. All right, let me go ahead back and maximize this. And then
Active activity, anything that helps with teaching and learning.
They can be printed out into physical copies for a very low cost and given to the students. It can also be an online resource as well.
So open educational resources include not only openly licensed materials, but also resources that are in the public domain. This includes everything from photos from NASA to reports published by the government, and even things like bills and laws.
OER are different than traditional published resources because they come with the license to make adaptations to the material kind of baked into the resource from the beginning.
Open educational resources can be considered as free plus permissions. And those permissions are 5 R's. You can reuse, remix, revise, retain, and redistribute the content.
Reuse means to take a resource and use it in any context you want. Remix means taking multiple resources and mixing them together and creating a new resource out of it. Revise means to make a copy of the resource and actually change it and adapt it to the local context. Retain means to keep and control a copy of the resource forever. And finally, redistribute means the right to freely share whatever you've created.
all right. So let me stop sharing that and let's go back to our PowerPoint. All right. So that's just a real quick introduction into what OER is. And we're going to kind of get a little bit more in depth with that as we go through it. So open educational resources are both teaching and learning materials. So these are materials that are for you as classroom teachers, and also materials for your students as well. And they mentioned and referenced the 5 R's in the video, and those we're going to go over those in just a second. And then you also have places like Creative Commons, which have open resources for you to use. So the 5 R's that they mentioned, and we're going to go a little bit in detail, these are retain, the first one, and that's really basically where you get to keep any of the resource. You're not paying for it. You don't have to pay to use it. It is yours to keep and to own. You also have permission to reuse this resource in any way that you seem fit, especially with regards to educational purposes. The wonderful thing that I love about OER resources is that you get to revise them. And this is where you get to make the source yours for your particular classroom and to meet the needs of your students. So for example, if you have, say like the last class I taught, I had a world history class, and it was a co-taught class with about 13 special ed kids in it. And of those 13 kids, I had probably 3 or 4 of them that had very, very low reading levels, like down around 3rd, 4th grade. And so I could use these OER resources and really adapt them to meet the needs and the Lexile levels where they weren't overwhelming for my special ed kids in high school. And then you can also remix them. And this is, again, another beautiful part about OER, is that you can take a little piece of one source or one item that you really like, and you can take another piece from another item that you like. You can combine them together to make something new and creative, and something that works really well for your classroom. And I've done that countless times where it's like, oh, I like this lesson or this piece of OER, but I just don't maybe have time to do all of it. So I'm just going to take one little portion of it and use it. Feel free to do that. And then lastly, you can always redistribute. So there's no problem with you posting these, say, on your Canvas or Schoology pages. There's no problem with you making copies and distributing it. They are completely free and open to do what you want with them. So let's talk about the different types of OER, and there are a bunch of different ones in here. I've got them listed on here. So first is a repository. And so some of that, and there are multiple ones. These are some of the more common ones. So the first one would be like the OER Commons, and these are all hyperlinked. So when at the end of this, I will give you guys probably next week sometime, I'll send out a PDF with this PowerPoint on it, and it will have all of these hyperlinked for you. But it's got OER Commons, and here I can just show you a little bit here of what that looks like. So this is what OER Commons is. And so this is fantastic, and it may take a little bit of a while to show fully on your screen, but you can search by subject. So you can go, so especially for like those of you that are teaching elementary, you can search English language arts and history or social science. You can search by a bunch of different things. You can go by an education level if you want to look at lower primary or more of those intermediate grades, high school. And then they've also got like the next gen science standards, which Arizona standards are kind of based off of, Common Core stuff. I don't know if they have the C3 framework, which is what our social study standards are, but they do have standard searches in here for you. All right, let's go back to this. Let's see. All right. I think are you guys seeing the screen here? Maybe I have to let's see. Oh, nope, that went away. Hold on here. Let's see. Oh, there it goes. Sorry, I accidentally shut this down. All right. Let's zoom ahead here. All right, so that's OER Commons. Creative Commons is another one. OER can also be textbooks as well. They can be, for example, there's one called Project Gutenberg, which essentially these are all just textbooks that are free for you to use as secondary sources. Again, you can take pieces out of it. You can print and redistribute these. So for example, I know many times maybe you don't have enough textbooks for your whole classroom. Try looking for, if you need to use a textbook as some kind of corroborating piece of evidence, go out to Project Gutenberg and some other textbook sites that are OER, and you can maybe print those out, and then you're free to print and copy and redistribute those. Another type of OER are courses, and these are courses that can be for your students. They can also be for you yourself too. And so some of the better ones you may have heard of Khan Academy. So Khan Academy, anything on Khan Academy is open educational resource, which means you can take it, you can download it, your kids can watch the videos for it, you can link to it, and there's no problem with that. MIT also has great courseware websites that you can go out and use. And let me just show you here. So for example, you can find different courses. This is for you if you want to increase your content knowledge. You can go looking at different resources, podcasts. They have all sorts of videos here that you can look at. For example, here's one on Congress and the American system. Maybe you haven't taught government in a really long time. Or if you're teaching 8th grade for the first time, sometimes it's good to kind of bone up on your own subject matter. And so that's a really good place to look at these open educational courses. You also have supplemental materials and multimedia. So anything on Vimeo is considered OER, as well as Flickr, which through Creative Commons is again all OER. A lot of supplemental materials like ancillary materials that you may find like lecture notes or lesson plans online, many times those are OER. You can have PowerPoint presentations, assignments from students, and different activities that can have OER. Another great place to look is there are listservs that many universities will have OER basically distribution lists that you can go out there and find those. So when we're using open educational resources, especially with regards to social studies, we really want to focus on primary sources mostly, and then some supplementary or secondary sources. So what exactly are primary sources? So primary sources are multiple different things. Primary sources are sources that were created by someone that was there at the time. So you're talking about an eyewitness that saw something or experienced something and then did something to record that. And so it can be an archive or manuscript material, photographs, audio recordings, video recordings, and films are all primary sources that you can use. Anything that maybe if you write down journals, letters, diaries. So for example, people are keeping a journal of say what they're going through with this COVID experience of being quarantined, you know, that's a primary source of years in the future. Someone's going to look back and say, okay, how did people deal with this idea of, you know, physical distancing and being quarantined? Speeches. So you think any speech that any, you know, president gives, graduation speeches, speeches say by Martin Luther King Jr. or, you know, Malcolm X, those are great things that you can use as primary sources, maybe to, you know, talk about the differences between the speeches and, you know, what they were wanting. Scrapbooks, when people are creating scrapbooks, published magazines, newspaper clippings, newspaper articles, magazine articles are all primary source, as well as government publications. So any kind of law or government publication that's put out, those are all primary sources. Oral histories, anytime you have interviews of people, say of the Holocaust, or I know I worked with the Korean War Legacy Foundation, and one of the things we had to do for them was take interviews that they had taken from Korean War veterans and then transcribe them. And so that's all primary sources that you can use, and many of those are OER as well. You've got records of organizations. So this can be any kind of like data, or this is where you can maybe bring math and stuff, especially if you're teaching elementary school and you want to bring in some math with your social studies. Use some charts and graphs and things like that, different records, all that kind of data and stuff can be used as primary sources. Autobiographies, memoirs, printed ephemera, like any kind of advertising created at that time would be primary sources, along with artifacts, research, public opinion polls, things like that. So here's just a couple of examples to show you some primary sources. So for example, here I have a map of the battlefield at Antietam that was hand drawn for one general. I also have here a letter from Samuel Cable to his wife and mother, and he was a soldier during the Civil War, writing back home saying, hey, this is what my experience was. Both of these would be considered primary sources. A textbook, on the other hand, as you're looking at this would be a secondary source. So this would be something that if I'm teaching, say, the Civil War, or maybe you're teaching like 5th grade, this would be something you could do in 5th grade, maybe something in junior year. You want to use the textbook basically as supporting materials for those primary sources. So you always want to go to those primary sources first and foremost, and then go to the secondary source, which would be a textbook. All right, so this is me trying to be clever. Primary source is basically an eyewitness that was there at the time. So I want you guys, I'm going to give you some examples of sources, and I want you to tell me if it's a primary source, yes or no. So here I have a copy of the Declaration of Independence. So in the chat box, if you can just write yes if you think it's a primary source, or no if you think it's not. Perfect. You guys are all geniuses. It is very much a primary source. Again, it's a government document. It was written at the time. A great thing to do with this piece of this primary source that I've done in my classrooms is to take Thomas Jefferson's original primary source and the Declaration, and then look at what actually was the final version of it and see what was left out, and have kids really investigate that and make those kinds of comparisons. That's great investigation using a primary source. All right, here you have an excerpt from a textbook on Native Americans, and it includes some Native words. Would this be a primary source or not? Yes or no? Perfect. This is not a primary source, even though it does have indigenous language words in it. And sometimes you will see in secondary sources or in textbooks, they may have, because they have gotten better about putting some excerpts in of, say, primary sources. Maybe if they had something that maybe an oral history or tradition or story that was told down that maybe they wrote, or maybe a written document in there, that could be part of it, but this as it is would not be a primary source. Video footage of the 9/11 terrorist attacks, would this be a primary source, yes or no? Perfect, absolutely. It was taken at the time, and it very much is a primary source. Next one here, I've got a map of the Lewis and Clark expedition in 1804. So would this be a primary source, yes or no? Perfect. So given that this was created at the time, it is a primary source. And here we have a map of Lewis and Clark expedition 1804. So would this be a primary source, yes or no? Exactly. So here we have two same exact sources. One would be a primary source, one would be a secondary source. And that's really the big difference, you know, is this was created well after the fact. So I always tell my kids maps are just like, you know, any other kind of primary source. You want to check, you know, who made them and why made them, and that maps will have a bias and a point of view, just like anything else. And so definitely keep that in mind, and they're great to use. Here's an oral interview with a Holocaust survivor. So would that be a primary source, yes or no? Fantastic, absolutely. And then here we have a student reading log. Would this be a primary source or not? Yep, perfect. So the students creating it at the time, they're witnessing it. This is, you know, a record of what they read, and they read some pretty fun books, it looks like, too. All right, so here's an article from, it's from an article by Joe Sanguillo for Discovery Education. And I think this is a really perfect example of why we use primary sources in social studies. And I'm gonna read this just because I feel it is so important to read. So he says, consider this excerpt from the first edition of the American Pageant, which is a very widely used textbook even today throughout the United States. And this was a copy from the textbook in 1956. So in the 1956 version of American Pageant, it states, the average ex-slave freed by the war and the 13th Amendment was essentially a child. Life under the lash had unfortunately left him immature, socially, politically, emotionally. To turn him loose upon the cold world was like opening the door of an orphanage and telling the children they were free to go where they liked and do as they wished. One of the cruelest calamities ever to be visited upon the much abused Negro was jerking him overnight from bondage to freedom without any intermediate stages of preparation. The hapless Negro was in some ways even more of a menace to himself. Joe Sanguillo goes on to say this simplistic, false, and condescending narrative was actually presented as facts with no quotes from African Americans living through Reconstruction. And this unfortunately was not an anomaly. 40 years later, an author by the name of James Loewen, who wrote a great book, if you haven't read it, I highly recommend it for just something fun to read, called Lies My Teachers Told Me. And he researched and he reached this conclusion when he surveyed about 12 US history books in his first edition of his book in 1995. So we've got a 1956 textbook here. He goes back in 1995 And James Loewen then writes that no book can convey the depths of the Black experience without including material from the oppressed group. Yet not one textbook in 1995, mind you, not one textbook in 1995 let African Americans speak for themselves about the conditions that they faced during Reconstruction. So here we are, 20 years later, 25 years later, and you still have textbooks that are not fully giving that tale of what life was like during Reconstruction. What did the Middle Passage look like? And this is especially, I think, given the times in which we live in, as educators, we need to be even more cognizant of presenting people's authentic views of what life was like during the events that they lived in. And the only way that you can do that is through primary sources. And I have found, as a white woman teaching in a majority minority school, that by using those primary sources of the people that lived through, Reconstruction, or I mostly taught world history in this class, in this high school that I taught at, talking about, the Middle Passage and really giving that depth of understanding of what people went through, led to that one buy-in from my class, because they're reading truly authentic pieces about people that look like them and sounded like my students. And it also gave a validity to me as a white woman teaching my students of color, which, it was 60% African American and Native and Hispanic and Native American. So actually it was 75, excuse me. So how do you engage your students with primary sources? So this is especially for those of you that teach maybe younger grades. Pictures are going to be your best friends. Images are going to be your best friends. And this is what you will use, because obviously your kids are emerging readers. Maybe they're not great readers. Also, like I said, I found in my SPED classes where I had kids with a third grade reading level and a sophomore world history class, I would pull out pictures too. And maybe I'd give that student with the really low reading level, I would give them an image maybe instead of a tough document. So this is what you would do, is you'd give them essentially this picture and ask students, okay, what do you see? What's happening here? What do you observe? And have them write down. And again, writing is great. And this is where we as social studies teachers can help ELA teachers. And there are gobs and gobs of research now going on about how using social studies and science to kind of support ELA and writing will actually improve reading scores, which we all know that's what, every principal wants, that's what parents want to see. And so by using these primary sources, especially in our primary grades and intermediate grades, you can get the kids writing, and that's increasing this background knowledge that they need. So ask your students what's going on. So for example, this is actually from the Library of Congress, which has a great just wealth of resources for you guys. We're going to go out there and I'm going to show you kind of what they have for you. But you ask students what to do. And so for example, students will look at this and they maybe think, oh, they're in a kitchen because it kind of looks like a kitchen. And then you ask your students, okay, well, what evidence do you see that this is in a kitchen? And then as the student looks further, it's like, oh, wait, this isn't the kitchen. It's, something else, like what are these bags on the floor down at the bottom? There are all these shelves at the top. It's a mail room actually. And so from the turn of the century. So images are a great way, especially to use primary sources in younger grades, but I also find too in older grades, especially in high school, they are a fantastic way to kind of introduce a subject matter and maybe get kids interested in it. I don't have it here. I do it on the, and some other webinars where I show just maybe before we introduce the Civil War, or you could even use this for 5th grade too. On the Library of Congress, they have images of the contents of Abraham Lincoln's pockets on the night that he was assassinated. So I just show the kids like one picture of, say, one item from his pocket, and they have to guess, okay, who did this belong to? Why is it there? And then I show them a second picture and they have to figure out how is it related. And I'll do that as like an anticipatory set, for just like the first 15 minutes and get them kind of interested, like who was this person that owned these things? I've also done the same thing where I've gone out and looked at immigration. And I do it with items that Chinese immigrants had when they came over in the 1880s. Like, who are these people? And it's a great way to kind of get them guessing by using pictures and these primary source images there. So primary sources, why do we use them? And again, what do they do? And we've talked a little bit about that. But one, they will engage your students. They'll get your kids asking questions, which gets them into some of those disciplinary skills and processes for our new Arizona standards. So anything where the kids are asking questions and then having to back it up with evidence. Again, as simple as just asking the kid, when a kid says, oh, these are men in a kitchen. Okay, well, what evidence do you see that tells you they're in a kitchen? And it's like, oh, wait, I don't see any stoves. I don't see a refrigerator. Okay, so my hypothesis is wrong. I have to go back and figure this out. And again, use evidence to do that. And so primary sources will engage your students and get them interested in the subject matter. It also, like I said, develop those critical thinking skills. They learn how to see cause and effect. They will be able to really understand those multiple perspectives. You can use primary sources to hit the disciplinary skills and processes that talk about like chronology, like what came first and what came second, by reading about how people dealt with events in time, or looking at images from what came first and second. And so it really helps develop that kind of a narrative. And then this is the beautiful part of it, it is that you are giving your kids that background knowledge. Instead of you telling them what this is, they are figuring it out themselves. And in doing that, then what they're doing is they're creating that buy-in, and they're able to remember it in a much more meaningful way because it's tied to something that they've done. They've created graphic organizers with it. They've made written essays with it. Maybe they've done timelines with it, whatever it may be, right? Because they're developing that knowledge on themselves. They remember it internally, and then they're going to remember it further and do better on any kind of assessment that you may give them down the road. So how do you use primary sources? So you first start off with like thinking of your unit and finding the sources for them, which we're going to go into that here in a little bit. But then you also, textbooks have a place, you know, they do have a place in our classrooms, but think of them more as a secondary thing. It's not something that you, in your social studies classes, or when you think, okay, we're putting away our English, now we're taking out our social studies. It shouldn't be like that anymore. It should be really seamless, especially at the elementary grades, that kind of integration with social studies and ELA. But especially at secondary grades, your textbook should not be something that you're using very often. You really should be using these primary sources because that's what the new standards are, and that's what gets kids thinking and using them. But then what you do is you then say, okay, look at our textbook, and now what corroborates that? What backs up what you read in the textbook, or maybe what's missing in the textbook? And that's always a really powerful piece, especially when we're looking at marginalized peoples and different views, is have the kids look at the textbook and say, okay, if we're looking at this at World War II, say, for example, and you've already had kids look at primary sources of soldiers, and you found resources from African-American soldiers, maybe you found resources from Japanese-American soldiers, you know, where their parents are sitting in internment camps. You've got references from white soldiers. Okay, now let's look at the chapter in your textbook. What's missing in here? And what that does is that really gets the kids thinking outside of the box, and, oh, okay, maybe the textbook is, you know, missing something, or again, it's a secondary source, or maybe it's backing it up. It also, primary sources, when you're doing this, it's brainstorming a dialogue. And again, especially when, you know, I mean, I taught AP and I've taught honors, which is great because those kids just naturally have an easy way to, you know, really discuss things and get into some difficult subjects. But even with my kids in the, you know, in my Title I, you know, majority minority school, you know, they're not used to thinking that way. But then, man, once you start doing this over and over again, the kids really start asking these amazing questions and get into thinking that they never thought they honestly could before. And I found that to be really powerful as a teacher, that I would actually say to my kids, you know, this is not something that you guys could do back in August. you could not read two documents and make these kinds of connections. And I said, look at how easy you're doing it now that it's April, and you know, we've been practicing this all year. And it really gave them a lot of confidence going forward too. It helps students move past a main idea. Again, it's kind of that Socratic way of thinking where you ask a question, you investigate it using primary sources, that leads to more questions, which then leads to more investigation and more questions. And especially as we're kind of in this kooky, weird environment where, you know, next year, who knows what school is going to be like, right? And, you know, most likely we're going to have probably some kind of hybrid thing where kids are going to be at home doing work and they're going to be held accountable. So what better way to get kids engaged in the material? Because that was the big thing that we heard when we had office hours from teachers, was how do you keep kids engaged when they're at home, is get them moving past those ideas. So have them use primary sources and ask these questions. And then as they get intrigued by something else, great, run with it. You've got your day off today. As something extra, maybe it's part of your choice board or something where it's like, hey, take something you learned and go research it further, or go investigate it further, or make some kind of graphic organizer or info chart taking your idea further. It also allows you to use multiple formats because, again, not every kid learns the same way. I don't teach the same way every day. And so that's the beautiful thing about primary sources. It can be visual, it can be auditory, it can be, you know, reading, it can be communicating in different ways. And it really allows for that kind of flexibility. And again, like this, like I said a while ago, this really lets people speak for themselves. And I think now more than ever, given the education system, it's our job to speak for these people and to let people speak for themselves. And I think especially as, you know, if you do teach in a school that is a majority minority school, and if you do happen to be white, I think this is a great way to really make those connections for your kids to, you know, who they are and where they come from, but also to let them know that you hear them and you see them as well. So where to find these OER primary sources? So we're going to go out and spend a good chunk kind of looking at some of these. So first of all, let's see here. So again, when you guys get this PDF, these will all be hyperlinked for you. And I've kind of broken them out between some K6 sites and some secondary sites, but here's just some big ones here. So this is just going to take a second because my internet. Let's see, so this is Social Studies Central. So this is actually through the Kansas Department of Education, and they have listed here primary sources and a whole bunch of sites that have been vetted that you can go out and look to. So here's African history on the web that has a research guide to primary and secondary sources. So anything, any unit that you may have, you can come out here and look. Here's a medieval source book. Let's see, Authentic History Center. Here's American Rhetoric. So this has got audio and video texts of speeches of Americans all throughout history. Here's some ancient history for 6th grade teachers, Asian history for 6th grade teachers, world history teachers, all these different sites. And this is a great New York Public Library, the Park Service, a whole bunch of different places here. This is one, so this is the Library of Congress site, and I highly recommend you guys going out and getting a, you can join, it's for free, you sign up, it's the Teaching Primary Sources Network. And so again, this is through the Library of Congress, and what they have done, which is really nice, is they have used this TPS network to kind of cull together different groups, and people make different sets of like primary source sets, which are already done for you. So this is, I'm already logged in, it just automatically logs me in. But here you can go through, and so here someone has created early explorers. And so you can go, and this is a link that they found through the primary source network that you can just click out here. And here are early explorers. And so they have a list of, say, videos here that, you know, they found for early explorers. Here's one on ancient Rome. Here's historical sources. Here's one on a Rosetta Stone introduction. Here they also have culled together some links, and these are other teachers all over the country that have done different things. So these are different links here. It also, you can discuss things with other teachers, look them up, different things like that, which is really, really nice when you go out and do these different things. Also, they offer librarians too, which is fantastic. So if ever you're like, gosh, I have this unit, I don't have very many primary sources, it will be something that you can look at too. Sorry, yeah, if I scroll, the screen gets a little blurry. I'll try not to scroll, so actually then you can see it a little bit. Yeah, it is for everyone. Unfortunately, I have really crummy internet. All right, let's get back to the set. And then the last one that I wanted to show that's just general is the OER Commons. So again, I'm not gonna scroll so that way you guys can look at it. So it should take a minute, but it should clear up here. Again, this OER Commons is a great place to kind of look at. And again, you can go by standards, you can go by subject area. Here, it's got all sorts of stuff. Here's a 3rd grade history unit with Native Americans, which actually for us, that would be perfect for 4th grade, which brings me to another thing, that is you're searching. Sometimes it's better to search for subject matter than it is to search by grade. Because for us, Arizona, we do 3rd grade is Arizona history, where 4th grade is obviously Arizona, but it's more, Arizona regional stuff. So looking at Native Americans of North America would actually be perfect for a 4th grade one. So definitely I would say look at subject matter rather than grade level. But here you can search on media format, all these different great ways to look here for that. All right, so here are a couple here I just want to show you for those of you that teach K-6. So this is oh, that link doesn't work. Oh no. All right, I'll have to go out and find that for you guys. But this one here, One History Primary. So this is a website that is geared specifically for teaching primary sources to elementary students, which is fantastic. So it goes through primary sources overview, which this will give you maybe some challenges, what to use, when not to use it, to maybe delve a little bit deeper into it. It also, this is fantastic looking at bias, like how do you source sources to make sure that we know that we're getting legitimate things. It's got classroom resources here, examining the evidence. Again, it's got all sorts of different things here. So this is a great place to go, finding primary sources that they have here. And this would be good for 4th grade, 6th grade. You could even maybe use it for 7th grade. And then for secondary, this is the OER project. These are the people that do Big History. And so they have two sites now. They have the Big History project, which is more, kind of middle school. So if you teach 6th or 7th grade, this is great thing. Everything is OER, it's free, it's all downloadable. You can send it to us. Yes, I will send you the PowerPoint. I just happened to look at glance at the chat. You can get things off of here. The nice thing too about the Big History project is they do have different Lexile levels. So again, it's great for those, sped classes where you've got kids that are reading at grade level or maybe a little bit above, and then you've got kids that are reading not so, below grade level. And then you've got the World History Project. So this one is geared more towards high school world history. And so this one you will definitely want to check out there if you teach high school. Again, Econ EdLink. Now this is great, again, because economics is one of those things. I taught economics for 5 years in, let me get rid of that, 5 years at high school. And Econ is now part of the standards for K-12, which can be really intimidating if you never took an economics course. I'm telling you, go out to this website. They have got fantastic lessons, primary sources, and you can see here from this, they've got lessons for grades K2, grades 3, 5, 6, 8, and then also high school. And so it is fantastic. I have used tons of lessons from these guys. Highly recommended, especially for elementary school. So if you are looking at, it's like, oh, okay, well, I can incorporate social studies and my ELA, and I can, you know, kind of kill two birds with one stone, which is always, you know, I'm all about working smarter, not harder. But, you know, we really just, I cannot get any econ in. This is where you go to substitute in an economics lesson or two, that you can get that stuff and meet the standards. And it's so user friendly. Don't be intimidated, and then you get your econ in there. This is another one, again, I would say for middle and high school. This is from the group that brought the Stanford History Education Group, or SHEG. This is through Stanford, and Sam Weinberg, who is the professor there that started it. So he has come out with this civic online reasoning, and it's a partnership with Stanford, and I'm going to scroll down just a little bit, so be patient. Stanford and a bunch of these very legitimate, highly respected news organizations to really teach kids, how do you know if a source is real or fake news, right? Because that's kind of become a very, very big thing. And it's all about teaching kids. I'm going to click here and hopefully we'll get to see it. It's all about answering these 3 questions. So hopefully my screen will kind of stop being blurry in a minute. But it's all about kids learning who's behind the information, what's the evidence, and then what do other sources say. And the whole premise of this is that instead of students like going out, and I'm just as guilty about this, I wish this had come out when I was still in the classroom. I would have my kids do a research project, and they would find a source and they'd read vertically all the way down this source before they find out, oh, okay, this really doesn't work for what I'm researching. And now what CORE does, and these lessons are fantastic. I went out there and looked at a bunch of them, and they're great. Instead of reading vertically, what the kids do is they read horizontally. So as soon as you have them open up a site, they instantly should then open up a new tab and look and say, okay, where can I find this information elsewhere? Is it legitimate? Who is, you know, this organization that put out this website? And they are fantastic. So I highly recommend. And it's not just civics. I think this is something that all teachers, we need to do, is teach kids to be media literate, which is actually part of our standards. It's very specifically put into the 8th grade standards. I would use these CORE lessons a lot. And then the last one for US history, because I'm trying to hit all of them for high school, excuse me, is teachingamericanhistory.org. This is a great website where they've got all sorts of documents out here, then primary sources, they've got lesson plans. And what you can do is you can go out and find, again, these primary sources, and you may have the whole document. Feel free to excerpt it. Just take a paragraph, just take whatever you may need from it. And that works out really well. So this is a great place to go for American resources. See, I'm going to close some of these so that way my internet stays pretty good. All right, so let's see. So secondary sources, again, as a reminder, as you're going out and researching some of these, secondary sources are going to be one step removed from a primary source, or maybe multiple steps removed. They will cover the same topic, but they will often add analysis and interpretation. You'll mostly find secondary sources are books or textbooks or scholarly top articles about a topic. They can be documentaries, critiques, biographies, maps, and textbooks as well. And the key thing is that the author is not involved in the event. Now, they are useful, and I found them to be really great to kind of sum up or corroborate what a primary source is. So we've got about 10 minutes. How do you use these in your classroom? So when I sent the email to you guys, I think it was yesterday, I wanted you to start thinking about a unit in which you wanted to enrich with primary sources. And so that's kind of where you start with. And as you do this more and more, it gets easier and easier, and you start finding sources, and you'll start kind of creating and being your own librarians and finding them. You then select and prepare. So you're going to select the primary sources you want to use, only a handful of them, and then prepare them by editing them if you need to. Some sites will already edit them for you, like the OER project for Big History does. The Stanford History Education Group, SHEG, already does. And so some of those you will find will be already edited. And then you want to develop questions. You maybe do scaffolding, some graphic organizers, think of some group work or paired work to kind of help develop those questions, and then create assessments that students can use where they're evaluating and answering the question, or it's tying to a bigger unit or deeper meaning. So again, this first part is just select a unit. Don't feel, especially if you've never used these before and you're not sure how to, don't overwhelm yourself, right? You know, that's one of the beautiful things about social studies not having a statewide test is that, you know, yes, the standards are to be fully implemented this fall, but honestly, there's nothing that is holding you, you know, to that. So if it takes you a little while to find more primary sources, fine. The key is that you need to just be doing this and getting more and more into it. So just start by thinking of a unit and, you know, maybe setting goals for yourself. Maybe you're going to do 1 unit a month, or maybe 1 unit a quarter, something like that, whatever it may be. Look at that and think, okay, I'm going to really enrich this unit with primary sources. Now, as you're going through your primary sources, these are the things that you'll want to think about as you're looking at them. 1, consider who your students are. So their age, their reading level, their prior knowledge, if they have, you know, for example, sometimes you may have a class that, you know, they had this really awesome, you know, elementary teacher that went really in depth into ancient Rome. And so maybe as a 6th grade teacher, you don't need to hit it so hard because these kids got it when they were in their intermediate grades. So, you know, pay attention to that too. Also look at their online attention span. Don't necessarily have them read large documents for long periods of time. It may not work. And the same honestly goes for videos. You know, short little video clips are fantastic and even better than watching a video for an entire class period. Plus you could maybe read a document and watch a clip, and then you're getting even more. Also think of interests and personal connections, you know, especially if, say, you know, you teach, like I said, the last school that I taught in had, we were about 5 to 8% Native American. So anytime I could make any kind of personal connection to maybe the indigenous tribe that they were with, or some kind of thing like that, I would always try to bring up that reference again to them. And again, remember that there's no one size fits all primary source. Vary it, keep them all different things. Use pictures, use video, use audio, and keep it varied, and that's going to keep your students more engaged and interested. This, when you are thinking about primary sources, I think this is just a great chart, especially for those in K through 6. It's like, okay, so how do I use these? So, you know, in kindergarten, you're going to want to introduce artifacts and photographs, posters, and again, you're making those kinds of observations and comparisons using like maybe multiple sources. Then in, say, 1st and 2nd grade, you can start maybe introducing some diary entries where maybe you're reading them with your kids, some drawings, some simple maps, other primary sources that are maybe more simple, like maybe tickets to movies or to whatever it may be, like railroad tickets or something like that, menus, catalogs, that kind of stuff. And again, always ask your kids to observe, have them reflect, and have them wonder and ask more questions. 3rd grade, you can start to introduce more words with newspapers and documents. In 3rd and 4th grade, you can start to look at multiple points of view. So have maybe 2 different opposing points of view about the same event. And then 5th and 6th grade, you can start to do more complex historical documents like the Declaration of Independence. There's no reason why kids can't read that in 5th grade. And then do multiple formats. And really for grades 6 through 12, any document is good. And always just, you know, comparing to do different ideas. So now you develop questions. So again, this I find to be difficult, especially if you've never done primary sources before, or you're not that, you know, it's not that comfortable for you. So I wanted to give you a couple of kind of canned things for you to use. So let's go out here. So this is through the Library of Congress. And these are teachers' guides that are already done, scaffolded. This is excellent observe, reflect, and question, or it's observe, reflect, wonder. You'll see it listed at that. And what this is, let's see if it pulls it up here. but it's a worksheet that you can already do where you take a primary source, say like that one where I showed you where the men are in the mail room. So you give your kids that picture and then have your kids fill out these boxes, and you can have them do it in paired groups and all that kind of stuff. Especially like if you're using pictures, one thing that I like to do as well is I will, just because it's cheap and I'm frugal, I will get and I'll laminate my pictures so that way I can use them over and over again. I'm only having to print them once. Also, if you laminate them, then I could have my kids use an Expo marker or like the old vis-a-vis markers, and then they could annotate directly onto that picture. So then they could maybe circle, oh, okay, it's a bunch of men standing in line, or, oh, what are these boxes here? Have them circle and do that kind of stuff with it. You can also, I know like there's that Oriental Trading Company that has clear plastic sleeves. You could get those clear plastic sleeves, slide pictures in, and have kids annotate on that. One of the things, yep, sheet protectors work really well. So I also use and advocate using art as a primary source. So for example, when I teach that interim period between World War I and World War II, one of the things I use is the painting that Pablo Picasso did of Guernica, which is an amazing, horrific, detailed, talk about engaging primary source. And again, had it laminated, the kids write on it what they see, they look at the different parts of it, and those are great to use. Oops, let me go back here and show you again on this. So they have these, and just give it a minute because it'll clear out and then you'll see it. But they have these already done for just regular primary sources, motion pictures, political cartoons, analyzing a newspaper, sheet music and songs, oral histories. So they've got all of these canned ones that you can go out and scaffold the learning for your kids to use these primary sources as well. So that's one. And then the other one I want to show you is the National Archives. And so they, like the Library of Congress, have these already prepared document analysis worksheets, which are fantastic. And it basically, I'm going to scroll, so it's going to be a little bit blurry here, but it should clear up in a minute. They also have them for elementary grades, and they also have them for high school. So again, it's looking at the document, observing its parts, sourcing the document, who wrote the document, why was it written. Let's see, let's look at, let's do artwork here since I was talking about art. And so here, it'll show you exactly what you have to do. So you have to look at the artwork, what do you see, and the kids write that down. And then what do you think this is? Is this a painting, a drawing? Is there a title? Again, getting into some of that sourcing with it. Then you observe the parts of it, and then trying to make sense of this. And so again, using this as evidence in what you are seeing. And then let's look at the same thing for secondary, just so you can see kind of the difference between the two. So again, it's the same idea, right? But you've got what type of art do you notice? What is the title? So that way you can get into that sourcing and maybe some of that bias. Again, looking at what you're seeing, summarizing it. And then as I scroll down, it should clear up here in a second. Again, what do you see, like making sense of it? Who made this? What kind of colors are used? Because again, art is huge, like what's being highlighted, where is the shadows being created, what's happening in time period for this. And so these are great kind of already prepared canned resources for you guys. So, and then lastly, you want to use your primary sources to evaluate your students' learning, right? That's kind of the whole point. We want to make sure that what we're doing. And again, this doesn't have to be a multiple choice kind of exam. It can be something like maybe they define a term. Maybe they take a list of items and rank those lists, and then, okay, why did you put this one at first, this one second? That's all inquiry and, you know, that kind of disciplinary thinking. You can have them annotate the sources as the assessment, or making original timelines. Definitely any kind of visual chart, graphic, an infographic, or Venn diagram is fantastic. You can have them do small writing assignments. I would have my kids very often just do that as you know, just, hey, okay, in 4 sentences, summarize this kind of thing. You could have them participate in debates and discussions, philosophical squares, Socratic seminars are all fantastic ideas. You can have kids do narratives and role play where they're doing those kinds of assessments. And then there's always the writing. You know, they can always write an answer to the claim with compelling questions or making a counterclaim. And again, using evidence from the pictures and images and videos that they've watched as part of that. All right, our time is up. So just make sure to practice. Here I have this, and again, I'll send this out to you. This is our professional development website where we have all sorts of webinars and stuff going on, especially over summer. We've got a lot going on. We have Glenn Wiebe coming online for us. We also have Street Law if you teach 8th grade or high school civics. Government, that's a great thing that they're offering for first time free for us on using landmark cases. And then we also have a spotlight on the standards where we're partnering with the Capitol Museum and ASGA, the Arizona Geographic Alliance, to have spotlight on the standards for 3rd grade, which we've done in the past, but also now 4th grade too. So that's going to be fantastic. And then I also want to show our website to you guys. And again, here I can put this out here, so that way you guys can see it. So this is our website here. And on this website, what you've got here, I'm just gonna put it's gonna be blurry for a second. Let's see here. And what you've got here is it's got the standards by a glance, which make it very, very easy for, let me put this in the, oops. Let me Control A, copy. I'll put this in the chat for everybody. And this, you can sign up for our newsletter. And right here by saying subscribe to our newsletter. We also have grade levels at a glance, which that's the standards. A couple other things I wanted to show you were implementation resources. If you click out here, this has got also another link to all sorts of kinds of resources for, say, 4th grade. If this comes out, these are the course considerations or storylines. And then it's got all these different websites here for you guys to look at. And then last, we've got the ELA and social studies crosswalk. So with that being said, thank you guys. I kind of have gone over. If you can, just real quick, type your names into the chat box one last time. And then it'll take me about a week, but I will get your stuff updated on the ADE account, and then you'll be able to print your certificate, but it'll be about a week. And then you'll also get an email from me that will have this PowerPoint on it with the links. I will correct that one link that was broken. And I think that's it. And so lastly, since we don't really have time for questions, thank you guys so much for coming. I appreciate it. If you do have any questions, please, please, please feel free to email me. My email is right there. It's linda.burrows@azed.gov, or you can contact my supervisor, Tammy Waller. And we are, we're here to help you. We're here to give you anything. So if you have trouble finding something, let me know. And I think that's it. So thank you guys so much for coming. Have a great rest of the summer and enjoy.